it is remarkably close. I've got grassroots contacts. I mean, people are working very, very hard, but I've never seen it this close. And it is the case that Donald Trump tends to close strong. If you're sprinting with Donald Trump and you're neck and neck, you can expect him to close very strong. So that is a reason why you got a lot of people having a lot of anxiety if they think that a Trump presidency would be, harmful. People who are concerned about a Trump presidency are very, very concerned right now. I posted something actually on my Substack, giving people texting tips to kind of engage with their friends who live in swing states to try to encourage them to vote and to vote, for Kamala Harris. So if anybody wants to do something this weekend, if you can't fly to a swing state, knock on doors, the device you have in your hand right now could make all the difference. I think people forget in 2000, we lost Florida, Democrats, I'm a Democrat, lost Florida by 537 votes. Yeah, plus 5 votes in the Supreme Court. That's another story. But
which those were the most relevant votes, as it turned out. Those Supreme Court votes. Yeah.
But we literally had it was 537 votes. Almost everybody who's coming in, the 200 people we have here coming in, 100 people coming in, you have 537 Facebook friends. I mean, you got that many people in your phone contacts probably. So I do encourage everybody who's nervous. Worrying doesn't help. Work does help. Like Kamala Harris says, hard work is good work. And I did post literally a step-by-step guide to how you can engage your friends on by text messages and move them toward voting. So, but stakes are high. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling I'm not feeling anxious so much about Tuesday. Though, I mean, obviously this could go any way. I'm feeling more anxious about the global backdrop that the U.S. election is playing into. It's a much more dangerous world. This feels to me like a much more consequential election precisely because of that. I mean, I know that, you were one of a few well-known people out there in the U.S. political spectrum that really did believe that Trump was going to get it back in 2016.
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, 2016, 2017, the global environment was pretty stable, and now we have some major wars going on. We have some significant structural trends that are away from democracy. We have the world's most powerful and wealthy individual in the private sector that is all in on one side here. I think that bodes importantly for what happens afterwards. So I'm not someone who thinks that the U.S. is on the precipice of becoming a dictatorship no matter what happens. I don't believe that. But I do believe that other countries around the world could get very, very hurt by what the U.S. does and doesn't do. And that bothers me a lot. So maybe that's my greatest concern.
Look, I for people who, don't follow the global world the way that you do, can we just walk through like worst case scenarios, like what happens in Ukraine, what happens in China, and what happens in the Middle East? Those are the 3 hotspot areas that I hear a lot about, and more about than almost anybody alive. If there is a Trump presidency, what do you think happens to, say, Russia, Ukraine versus, say, a Kamala presidency? How do you see it?
So Russia, Ukraine is the most important because it's escalating meaningfully right now, because the North Koreans are sending 8,000 troops to the front in Kursk to internationalize this war on the ground, not just in terms of who's providing weapons. NATO's providing weapons, Iran's providing weapons. No. This is like actual thousands of fighting forces that aren't a part of this fight that are going to be on the front lines. And the Americans and NATO have told the Russians directly this is a major escalation that NATO will respond to. And I suspect these 8,000 troops are just the start. And North Korea is not a country we have a lot of influence over, frankly. Right. Pretty dangerous place. Trump would be very, very different. I will tell you that the people that are most freaked out in the world that I talk to about the U.S. election are not Americans. They are Europeans. Because for the Europeans, this Ukraine war is existential. No matter what Russia does, they feel like they're in a war with the Russians. Many of them have borders directly with the Russians, that they're going to have to provide more money, more defense, spend more on their own defense and they're countries that are also fiscally much more constrained than the Americans are. Their energy costs are higher. They're already housing over 2 million Ukrainians. There's going to be more, all of that. And they're deeply worried that if Kamala Harris comes in, they think, rightly so in my mind, that even though she wants to end the war, she'll coordinate with NATO, and then together they'll coordinate with the Ukrainians, and then they'll go to Putin and say, okay, here's our position. This is how we want to end the war. I think that if Trump is president, he certainly won't coordinate with the Europeans. He will instead, as he said, he wants to end the war in a day. What's he going to do? He's going to call Putin and he's going to call Zelensky. And by the way, one thing that I think is super interesting is he hasn't told us in what order he's going to call them.
Right.
I don't think it's going to be a Zoom call together. Right.
Right.
And the order really matters, because if you call Zelensky and Zelensky says, okay, right, Putin is under a lot more pressure. If you call Zelensky, Zelensky says, no way, I'm not a part of this because you're forcing me to do something I refuse to accept. It's then costless for Putin to say, well, I'm committed to it.
Right.
So, in other words, your position at the no limit poker table actually may matter more than your cards.
Wow.
This is not something people are thinking about right now, but I'm telling you that the Europeans are going to be under the gun. And if this goes badly, not only will the Europeans be handling this fight largely by themselves with Ukraine as opposed to with the Americans, but also their orientation towards China will be radically different than America's. And right now, the Europeans and the Americans are almost in lockstep on Russia. They're almost in lockstep on China. And both of those things could blow apart with a Trump administration. We could go into this for a longer period of time, but big picture, that's probably the thing that most concerns me about Trump coming in. I think, and believe it or not, I don't think that there'd be as much of a difference between Trump and Kamala on the Middle East, because even though Harris talks a very different game and has a lot of people that are pro-Palestinian among her constituents, she's ultimately very committed to Israel as America's top ally in the region. And of course, so is Trump. So it's the really great power picture that I think we have the most to be concerned about.
Tell me about what this Europe-China dimension of Ukraine. I've never heard that before. Just say a little bit more about what happens. So Europe suddenly decides to run into the arms of China because America's no longer trustworthy. Just walk us through that.
Sure. Well, a couple of things here. First of all, the Europeans, the Russians are the principal national security concern. China is not. China is a principal national security concern for the Americans. And the Europeans are following the United States on China largely because the U.S. is taking such a leadership role on Russia and Ukraine, critically for the Europeans. The Europeans, their economies aren't doing very well. They don't look at national security first and foremost around the world. They engage in business. They have a lot more exposure to the Chinese market. They need a lot more Chinese investment into Europe, where for the United States, there's a lot more decoupling going on between the two. The Chinese have recently done 14 ministerial level trips to Europe to try to reduce the sanctions that the Europeans collectively are putting on Chinese electric vehicles. And the Europeans have, 5 other areas they're teeing up.
Yeah.
A lot of European individual governments either abstained or opposed those sanctions for their own domestic economic reasons. Trump comes in, no longer supporting Ukraine, seen to be more, let's say, even-handed on Russia and Ukraine, and that's being generous. I think the Europeans would be all in on supporting Ukraine and fighting Russia, and economically see that they desperately need to be much more with the Chinese. They need to be hedging. So,
Right.
what has been a very tight alliance between the U.S. and Europe, remember, the people that Trump likes in Europe, Viktor Orban, right? Marine Le Pen,
the worst.
Right? To a degree, Giorgia Meloni in Italy. This is the Bolsonaros, it's the people that precisely the anti-establishment that are also becoming more powerful in those countries, just as they are in our country, Van. And so, again, they sometimes say, you get a sniffle, and down the road they get a cold. I mean, the people that died from COVID were the elderly, the people with pre-existing conditions. Geopolitically, Europe has all of the pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
It's old man Europe, and they can't afford this. A way that the Americans, we can afford to keep screwing up, right? Now, so do you think we can? Let me turn this back on us. Do you think we can afford to keep screwing up the way we have, or are there going to be more consequences for us this time around?
Well, I think we have consequences either direction. Obviously, I'm a Democrat. I've known Kamala Harris for 30 years. I voted for Kamala Harris as district attorney when I was a kid living in San Francisco in a flat with four other guys sleeping on a futon. And she was, rising star, Willie
You were
Brown.
sleeping with four other guys on a futon van. Is that a whole nother Substack we
And
have to do?
oh, the Substack. No, I have my own futon, but just barely.
Okay, good. Okay, I was just making
Uh,
sure.
exactly. But yeah, so I've known Kamala for a very long time. Her niece Mina used to babysit my kids. I mean, so I've known Kamala for a very very long time, and uh, I know that she would be a steady hand in resolving the problems that we have, dealing with the problems that we have. No, we always oversell what the president can do. The president can make things a little bit better or a whole lot worse is what presidents can do. And I think she'd make things a little bit better. I think she would follow through on her commitments to try to do something about child care costs, try to do something about housing, try to do something about giving more of a break for entrepreneurs as people get pushed out of traditional jobs. Everybody wants to become entrepreneurial. So I think that she would be there for regular folks, everyday folks, working class folks, doing the incremental things, drug cost reduction, that make life a little bit better. I think Trump would be doing things that make things a whole lot worse, especially because two of the things, you can take the democracy thing off the table, geopolitics. Let's just look at pocketbook issues. The two things he's most committed to are inflationary when it comes to what ordinary, everyday people are going to pay out of their own pockets.
Yeah.
If you slap tariffs on everything,
Yeah.
he pretends that somehow Chinese government is going to pay those tariffs. No, that just
We pay those tariffs.
yeah, so it's basically a
Yeah.
massive 20%. Kamala Harris calls it a sales tax. Is trying to make sure people
It's a
understand.
value added tax. It's a VAT. Countries
Yeah,
do it all over the world. Absolutely.
exactly. So that part is inflationary. If the price is here after the tariffs, the price is here. That's just pure math. And the other thing is that if he deports all of these low wage workers, which is the way to look at all of these, low wage people who are here, who are doing a lot of work for less money, you can say it'd be great to get rid of all of them because then Americans would take those jobs. I haven't seen a single American want to go and pick grapes or whatever, but fine. Americans take those jobs, but Americans are going to want to be paid a lot more. So that's inflationary as well. So if you deport all these low wage workers, that sends labor costs up. If you put a tariff on everything, that puts all prices up. So Donald Trump is literally running as the godfather of inflation, the father of inflation, the king of inflation, at a
Yeah.
moment finally of beating inflation. So I think that just for regular pocketbooks, everyday folks, a Donald Trump presidency, if he does the stuff he says he wants to do, would be really awful. And we just saw Elon Musk come out, who is kind of oligarch in chief, I guess, saying that it would be very very painful for Americans in the short term, and then
In the
later on,
short term. And then he thinks it'll be fine.
it's going to be fine. So, I mean, I don't know. People right now feel like they can absorb a lot more short-term pain. So there is, I think, a real challenge there, a real contrast there. But I don't think we can keep messing up. And I'll tell you, a lot of criticism for the right in our country, and I'm happy to be a part of those criticisms. But I think the progressives have to look in the mirror as well. It's not just that Trump has some magical pull for a lot of people. Some of the attitude and stances of progressives are also pushing. There's a way that if you are a straight white male, you might not think that you're welcome in some progressive circles. That the straight white male has almost become an insult or presumptively a negative. Well, you can't have a politics that says on the left, as many do, that all white people are racist, all men are toxic, all billionaires are evil, all Jews are colonizers, and then expect for anybody in those groups to hang around very long. So
Yeah.
then when Elon Musk, who in 2000, now it's inexcusable what Elon Musk is doing, but in 2000 he was an Andrew Yang Democrat.
Yeah.
In 2000, Elon Musk was an Andrew Yang Democrat. Now he is, Voldemort. Well, it's hard to say that he should have stayed if the politics of our party say he's a man, we're against him, he's white, we're against him, and he's a
Well,
billionaire, we're
especially when he was turned out individually, like when you're having a summit on electric vehicles and you've got a national champion for electric vehicles and you don't bother to invite him. I
yes,
mean, I think his reaction to that is execrable. But
yes,
I mean, the reality is, anyone in his position
would
would have
take
been
us,
incredibly pissed off at Biden personally
yes.
for basically showing him the hand.
Yeah, and I think that what's ironic is, and I think people don't remember that there was, Biden put more money on the table for climate solutions than anybody. He'll go down as a climate hero, but he decided not to invite Elon Musk because Elon Musk's workforce is not unionized. Well, I understand that, but the reality is, you then just handed the richest man in the world to the other party, and what do we get back? Liz Cheney. That's not a good trade. And then, I think the other thing you have to remember is all those labor guys, all the union people that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden walked the picket line for and also helped rescue. Some of those unions didn't even endorse Kamala Harris. And so to try to appease the labor unions, you piss off the richest guy in the world. The labor unions don't come for you. In the trade, you get, a Liz Cheney. That's not a great trade. So there are things on the progressive side that are worth examining. None of which means that we should take our foot off the
Yeah.
gas, stopping Trump. But when this is over, even if, and I'll say this and then we can go back, but don't forget, even if Kamala wins, and I pray that I pray that she wins. Afterwards, nobody who voted against her is leaving America. You're going to have the Tea Party equivalent really up in arms, possibly literally in arms. And so we've got a long way to go to get to governability, to get to common sense solutions. And I don't think that some of the attitude on the left has been helpful in Velcro takes two sides to stick. You can be very, very frustrated with what the right wing is doing, but progressives have to look in the mirror as well.
Look, I mean, some of the people I know, leaving aside Elon, that are that are some of the most powerful people in the Democratic Party, who are would be very interested in being a part of leadership, and have told me, look, there's maybe two or three spots for white straight men in a potential Harris cabinet, and so there's no point for me to
Wow,
even try. And that is
that's not good.
that's not the message you want those people to have. Even though I'm personally deeply sympathetic with the fact that I look at most CEOs and most boards in the United States, doesn't look like the United States.
At
Right.
all.
So, I mean,
Right.
absolutely, I think that we should have a country that is representative, and that should be true with the leadership. But that doesn't mean that
Yeah.
suddenly that white men aren't welcome anymore,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
like we see
Yeah.
where they go, and that
Yeah.
is clearly a much worse place for the country.
Yeah, yeah. And so I just think, we're trying to, I think, mature and grow up as progressives and figure out a way. Like, I love that our circle includes so many people who have been left out. Muslims are included, and transgender people are included, and frankly, black guys are included. There's a lot of people who were left out of other circles. They're now in this beautiful circle, but the circle still needs to be a little bit bigger and catch more people who may be, a little bit paler and a little bit maler, but they have good hearts and willing hands. We need everybody. I think we got to get back to that. The other thing I
Good.
would just say is that
Yeah.
I am very proud of the grassroots in our party. Talk to people in Philadelphia on the ground. The line for early vote around the city hall of Philadelphia yesterday went blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks. And so you do see, the grassroots efforts beginning to pay off. The ground game is not as good as I think people imagine it, just because when you had a change at the top of the ticket, it changes the way that you have to structure your rhetoric and structure your turnout or whatever. So getting all that worked out in 100 days is difficult. But right now, even as we're talking, there are people whose knuckles are raw and whose legs are tired because they are doing the turnout, which is a real work of democracy. So as much as I can criticize some of the faculty lounge kind of stuff that goes on in terms of, BIPOC and Latinx and all this weird stuff, at the grassroots level, people are fighting for their lives. They're fighting for democracy. They're fighting for, for a better economy. And if you're in Milwaukee or Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or Atlanta or Detroit right now, you are seeing a massive effort at the grassroots level to win this thing.
I mean, I will say when I look at what the advertisements have been about, and the fact that, since September, sort of the Republican advertisements, the Trump advertisements have been highest on transgender, in terms of what they're spending money on, which does not seem to me to be the top issue that we should be leaning into.
No.
And what Harris is spending money on is demonizing Trump, which doesn't seem to me the message that's going to resonate with most American voters. Like, we seem to be through the looking glass on this election. It is billions of dollars. It is over the course of 2 years. It's obviously a travesty of democracy. It's not the way a democracy would run, should run. The system, in my view, is already deeply broken. Now, I
Yeah,
still think it's worth fighting for.
I
I
agree.
don't want someone to come in that is going to completely break it.
No.
But it doesn't feel like we're fighting for the system right now. It doesn't. It doesn't feel like we're fighting for the people. It feels like we're just like in our trenches,
Fighting each other.
and you
Yeah.
know,
Well, I wonder. Some of this I think is you know, the devices that everybody's holding in their hands right now, watching us. In all likelihood, is social media, etc. I'm so curious. As you look around the world, I mean, you mentioned that you felt like in the Middle East, that there will be some continuity there. Um, I just want to call your attention to a few things and then get your reaction.
sure.
Um, Donald Trump is a two timer in all ways, um, including on this issue in the Middle East. On the one hand, he's signaling to the Jewish community and to Israelis that he's for them, he's with them, go get them, go beat them up, I'm with you. But then he also is in Michigan quite often talking to Lebanese Americans. His son-in-law, I think, is Lebanese American, and saying it's terrible what's happening, in Lebanon. It's awful. I'm going to do something about it. In other words, he's praising Israel's military posture against Hamas and Hezbollah on the one hand, but he's also damning it on the other, trying to pull away Muslim vote in Michigan. And I just wonder, is that just politics? I mean, how do you make sense of?
Look, I mean, if when I saw a week ago the advertisements that Elon's PAC was running on how Kamala Harris is really dangerously pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, and she was running that in Jewish communities, in Pennsylvania, and how the same PAC was saying that Harris is way, way pro-Israel and dangerous for you, and running that targeting Muslim communities in Michigan. This is literally as broken as the democratic system, as cynical, as damaging the civic institutions, as indifferent to Americans being connected with each other. This is traitorous behavior, which
Yes,
would anger me less if it was only him that was doing it, except I see this everywhere. I mean, I see it a lot around Trump, but then again, I saw all of those Democrats that were funding pro-Trump people in primaries who were so incredibly damaging and dangerous to the country so that they thought they'd have a better shot against them in the second round. Insanity. I mean, this.
yeah,
So first of all, if you're asking me, do I think that Trump is being cynical in the way he's running his campaign, and do I recognize that he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth, not to mention his ass and every other orifice? Yes, I'm prepared to say that, Van. I am. But
uh-huh.
but I am a political scientist,
Mhm.
and so I am going to focus on what he does. And I know that what Trump has done in his first term was incredibly pro-Israel. And what he has done was, after many presidents promised that they were going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and they did it just to get AIPAC money, and to, sort of make them happy. And then when the election happened, couldn't be bothered to actually do it. Right? He was the guy that moved the embassy to Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. He was the guy that recognized the occupied Golan Heights as Israeli territory. Um, Illegal settlements in the West Bank, no problem for Trump, right? Abraham Accords. He's the guy that actually got that done. Arguably the most important political foreign policy victory of his entire administration. First place he traveled as president. Presidents don't go to the Middle East, they go to Canada. They'll go to Europe. They'll go to the UK, the special relationship we used to have, right? Where did he go? He went to Saudi Arabia and he went to Israel. So, I mean, if you right now you ask Israelis, not American Jews, ask Israelis who they want to be president. I think it was last poll I saw last week from the Jerusalem Post. 66%, I think it was, that said Trump. 12% that said Harris. Find me an American ally that has that kind of a swing. You cannot, not in the world. Now, whether you think that's a good or a bad thing is a different story, right?
Well,
And even though I know that Harris is more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause in terms of their human rights, their ability to live as human beings, to have, like, the opportunity to feed themselves and educate their kids. I know she's more sympathetic to that than Trump would be, because Trump literally doesn't care about it at all. So the bar is low. But would she dramatically change policy towards America's most important ally in the Middle East? I have a harder time seeing that.
right.
So,
I mean,
we will see.
I'll tell you, the way I see it is that Kamala is a better choice both for the Muslim, Palestinian, Arab community and also for the Jewish Israeli community for the following reason. Um, I think that these young anti-Israel protesters are going to really regret not supporting Kamala Harris if Trump gets in. Because I do think that Trump will license some of Bibi Netanyahu's worst instincts.
I agree.
I think
I
Bibi
completely agree with that. Yes.
I think Bibi would feel comfortable, maybe, annexing parts of the West Bank. I think he would feel no compulsion to back off. And so I think that, these people, we're going to teach the Democrats a thing or two by just withholding our support. I think they will regret that mightily. But also, that is maybe good for Bibi Netanyahu in the short term. But I think that kind of license is bad for Israel and the Jewish community in the long term. Because in the long term, I think you have more people, even people who are sympathetic to Israelis and who are appalled by October 7th and who are horrified by Hamas, are beginning to ask, but what are the war aims here? Are we just kind of in a forever war now where Israel is just going to continue sort of using military-only strategies to manage its, some of its horrible neighbors? But is there a political end here, a diplomatic end, an economic end, a spiritual end? What's happening here? So I think that ironically, Trump playing both sides is going to wind up licensing horrible stuff for the Palestinians in the short term, but further isolating Israel in the long term, and it's going to be bad for both. Whereas I think Kamala is more likely to figure it out. Do you see it differently?
I think, yes, I think you're right, Van. I think I agree with that. But I am not sure that what Biden has done over the last year has been all that different in outcome. I mean, he has said different things. He has said he supports a two-state solution. Trump says he no longer does, even though he did at the time of the Abraham Accords. And yet the reality is the Israelis continue to act with complete impunity with their Palestinian populations in both Gaza and the West Bank. And that is an extremely popular position across Israel, and that the Israelis themselves no longer support a two-state solution. Look, Israel is this country. I mean, even, Russia, they take a piece of Ukraine and they give the Ukrainians Russian passports, and they say, you don't have you are now a part of Russia, right? The Israel is now occupying these territories with all of these Palestinians. They're saying, no, you don't get a state, but you're not citizens of Israel either, right? I mean, that's a colonial position to hold. And I mean, you and I may say that's fundamentally problematic. Lord knows the international community does. But as long as the Israelis have massive dominance in their intelligence and surveillance capabilities, their border capabilities, their defensive and their offensive military capabilities, not just vis-a-vis Hamas and the Palestinians, but even Hezbollah, which is the most powerful non-state military in the world, even Iran, which is like a serious petro-state right there in the Persian Gulf. It might be a very long time before some Israelis go back and they say, maybe we didn't learn, sort of much from the Americans after 9/11.
Look, I wish that BB would. I think two things have happened. One is, I don't think that BB has aims beyond perpetual war at this point, and I think that's awful. And I'm so proud of the Israeli left for standing up to BB and being in the streets and doing all the things that they've done. But so far, to not much effect. I do think one of the great mistakes that was made by Biden in the very beginning was, I remember after 9/11. George W. Bush, who I did not vote for and did not like very much, came before the country and he gave a speech in the well of the House, or the well of Congress.
Yep.
And he said, there is a group called Al Qaeda, which I'm not sure I knew before because I was just a regular person. So I didn't know all the names of these different terrorist groups. It's a group called Al Qaeda. This is what it's about. This is what its aims are. This is what it's done to us. And here's what we're going to do about it. Now, I remember sitting there. I was visiting a friend in New York City, sitting on the floor, watching television, and I remember feeling at least that I had some frame, I was educated. I knew a little bit more about the world when he finished talking. Didn't like anything he did afterwards. Um, I didn't get that moment after October 7th. I didn't get a Joe Biden standing in front of the world explaining there's a group called Hamas. It has been firing rockets for 10 years into its neighbor. My beloved predecessor, Barack Obama, spent billions of dollars building a defensive, iron dome over this country and David Sling to try to keep this little country alive, to try to make it possible for little Israeli kids to walk out of their house and go to school and come back. And now this group has taken it to a different level. And that is why we think that the Israelis have to be aggressive in their own defense, because we were passive in defense with the Iron Dome, and that didn't work. And at least some narrative, so that at least for a while, people could understand what the heck was going on. Yeah. But I think what happened is, without that speech and with BB, doing what he's doing, I think the average person could be forgiven for just looking at their phone every day and saying, well, October 7th was one bad day, but then there's all these other bad days afterwards that seem to be only for the Palestinians. We don't show the rockets coming over that Hezbollah is firing. We don't show that Hamas is still firing rockets every day. We just, so I think there's been a colossal absence of leadership, or failure of leadership here, both on the American side and the Israeli side, to at least help people understand what's going on. And so I don't know how we get out of it. I do know that I know Donald Trump a little bit personally, working with him on criminal justice.
Criminal justice, penal reform, yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. I know Kamala a lot more.
Yeah.
And I trust that in an impossible Rubik's Cube to solve, I trust that Kamala won't just break the cube. I think that Kamala will try to figure out at least how to get one side all one color. And right now, even that would be a victory.
Yeah, no, look, as I said, I think the thing that bothers me is that rogue actors, whether aligned with the US or aligned with Russia or aligned with nobody, are much more dangerous in this environment than they were 4 years ago, 8 years ago. There are a lot of wars going on, and America's ability, even when it's deploying leverage to get an outcome that it wants, has deteriorated significantly because we have abdicated leadership for a long time, because we are not seen as following through on our commitments from one administration to the next, because we don't even know what we stand for in terms of American values globally. I mean, do we stand for global security? Really? Do we stand for international rule of law? Really? Do we stand for global free trade? Really? Do we stand for democracy in our own country, never mind in others? Really? I mean, if people look at the United States right now, and they recognize that we don't even know what we stand for inside the United States. And so we sure as hell aren't going to give them answers internationally that makes them feel like they should take us seriously, either because we're offering them a security guarantee and they're like, well, we don't know if they're going to stick with that. We're offering them a trade agreement. We don't know if we're going to stick with that. Or we're trying to use some leverage to get them to behave more like the way we say we want them to behave, and then we're not consistent, we're hypocritical. So, I think for all of these things, I worry a lot more.
Yeah. Well, look, I think we're probably going to have more problems rather than fewer, no matter who wins this election, if nothing else, because climate change is really heating up the equator, and I think you're going to see a lot more people going north. And it's going to be a lot of brown people coming up into North America, out of Latin America. It's going to be a lot of Africans going up into Europe, out of Africa. And I think that's fuel on the fire for kind of right wing populist nationalism that will make it much more. I think the objective conditions ecologically are putting pressure on the West demographically, which I think in the short term advantages right wing populist backlash politics. So I think that's why I'm so tough on the left, because we're going to have to navigate a lot of emotion. We can't just be up in our head, well, rationally you should feel this way, and rationally it's unfair. Like, I think there's some emotion that people have with this much change,
Yeah.
ecologically, geopolitically, demographically, technologically, economically, in terms of gender roles. You're trying to shove a lot of change into the system if you're a progressive most of the time, and the change is hard. Even change you want is hard. Even change you fight for is hard. I sent my older boy, as off to college. From the time I met this little dude, we were trying to get him to poop in the potty and do his ABCs and tie his own shoes and do his homework and learn how to drive, so we could get him out of our house, so we could graduate his ass and get him out of our house. And we worked our ass off for 17 years. And the minute they gave him his diploma, I broke down crying. That was change I wanted.
Yeah.
But it was too much. They should have let. Can we have 5 more years of high school? Where's this guy going? So even change that you want, even change that is good, is brutally hard on people. And I think that progressives have to. Our IQ is off the charts. Our EQ is in the garbage can. You
And
cannot end this much
And
change.
does the GOP have better EQ? I mean, they've got good id, right? I mean, they definitely really understand like the animal passions.
Yes.
But do they have good EQ? Do they have good empathy with their
No.
fellows? I mean, they seem to with very certain demographics. But do you
Yes.
think they do more broadly? Because they are performing better. We see with Hispanics, with blacks than they were in previous, sort of years. Is that because they've figured out broader EQ, and what is it?
I think that there's a lot of wounded pride among men. I think. I think. I think it's very hard to be successful as a man. I think if you're a man of color, non-college, it's very hard. And you're seeing your cousin, you're seeing, who may be female, doing a lot better. You're seeing uh, the culture celebrating, you know, black girl magic and all of these different things. But there's no black boy magic. That's not a thing. And so I just think that the feminist, if you're a man of color, non-college, you have a feminist option and a masculinist option, and neither one of them are very good for you. The feminist option says, "Shut up, you're the problem." So whatever you're complaining about, shut up, you're the problem. We don't want to hear about it. We want to make sure we uplift girls. We want to make sure that we uplift moms. We want to uplift women. So that doesn't feel good. But then the masculinist option says, "Shut up, boys, don't cry." So you can't complain about your own situation, but you can't be sad, but you can be mad. We will give you the mad option. And so I think that if you can't be sad and you can't be seen and all you can be is mad, I think the Republicans do a much better job of giving you a pathway to be mad. And so
Yeah.
I think it's a tougher emotional job for a Dr. King or a Nelson Mandela or any of the great bridge builders to honor and dignify the people who are feeling oppressed. And at the same time, not dehumanize the people who might be seen as oppressors. Like Dr. King is trying to free the jailed and the jailer. Nelson Mandela is trying to free the oppressed and the oppressor so that we can all be dignified together. That's a tougher politics to sell at a
Yeah.
policy level. And it's a tougher note to sound when everybody's mad at everybody at a human level. But that is a challenge. We have to reestablish a progressive politics that's about dignity for all, opportunity for all, respect for all, including the straight white guys who are voting against us, recognizing that they don't want to be called out; they want to be called up. Donald Trump is brilliant to tell these guys, his voters, mostly often disproportionately male, we have a mission. We have something we got to do together. We're going to make America great again together. Now, I say great. I mean, America needs to be made great. I mean, I'm for that. It's a great mission. But I think your genius, if is worthy of a better cause. If you're a union guy, if you're a veteran, if you're a small business owner, Your genius is worthy of a better cause than just being mad at immigrants or being mad at transgender people. Let's make America great again by helping America's kids be great. And America's grandchildren do not look like America's grandparents, but they're still America's kids. And they still need you. I think we need to be calling them into something greater rather than calling them names and saying that they're in a cult. I think we are emotionally tone deaf to the emotions that are not able to be expressed in a progressive politics if you're a straight white dude.
No, we want to be part of something that is greater than ourselves.
Absolutely.
And I think, I mean, for example, one of the things I think that Kamala did very well is try to retake the American flag. Like, that is not a GOP thing.
Yeah.
I do not want to have a problem carrying an American flag. I was born in this country. I feel patriotic. Being patriotic means criticizing when you disagree. Give me my fucking flag back, right? But I am not a Democrat. I never have been. I've never been a registered and a part of a party because I don't like being boxed. I think of myself as, I mean, historically as a kid, I was all IQ. I wasn't EQ. I was like 11 in high school, 15 in college. And I was desperate to try to figure out a little EQ. And I got to tell you, as someone who worked really hard to try to figure out EQ, I am damned if I'm going to wear a white guys for Harris waltz thing. Because that is like just way too effete and metrosexual for like trying to be a normal human being for me. No, absolutely. I'm already a little white guy. Like, don't make it worse. You know, is that fair?
I guess fair.
That's fair. Like, you could do that. You want to be a white guys for Harris waltz. That's kind of cool for you. Screw that.
Yeah. Hey, look, I think this question of identity, I know we're coming up on time, but I think this question of what is an identity that can that can honor all of America, including, you know, America's founding reality was pretty ugly and unequal, but America's founding dream was about equality. We hold these truths to be self-evident. So can you just be a part of the American project of trying to close the gap between the ugliness of the founding reality and the beauty of the founding dream? That's what makes America America. Now, if you deny the beauty of the dream and just say, well, what about the ugly past? Or if you deny the ugly past and just say, well, what about the dream? I don't think you're being a good American. I think you're being a cheap patriot at best. But I think a deep patriot can hold that ugliness and hold that dream and say, we're going to keep working to pull this to close that gap. I think that is a patriotic identity that can be really inclusive, that can say we won't deny the past, but most importantly, we're not going to let the past have the last word. Yeah. We won't deny the pain of the past. We're not going to let the pain have the last word because tomorrow's more important for our kids. There is a pathway forward that can make sense of all of this, but it does require some smart and some heart, both of which seem to be missing in different ways for both these political parties.
I'm all for this. Should be, we call this conversation deep patriotism, not deep state patriotism, man. I mean, that's where we want to be.
That'd be awesome. I'd love it.
Okay. I see we're at the top of the hour. So, I mean, people are saying we should do this again. We should do it again. I'm all about that. But let's maybe after the election so we can figure out what the hell we're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, we'll dig out then. Brother, it's an honor. Let's do it again.
Thank you so much. Okay. Be good, man. Good to see you.